Hi and welcome. Sorry, we're only using mics because it's for the recording rather than anything. Welcome to our first lunchtime talk in Parasite history. We haven't had a lunchtime talk on a weekday for the last 2 years, and this is the first time we're having it with our international art residency participants, High&Low Bureau. Today's talk is actually on Decolonized Skies, George Clooney, drones, and democratization of the view from above. And this also has stemming firstly with something that they'll elaborate later on, but also it's also the proposal for them that they have that they supplied to the Apexart unsolicited proposal for this year. So in September, this proposal itself will be manifesting itself as an exhibition in Apexart. So just a brief introduction to the High&Low Bureau, who are very old friends of mine. The High&Low Bureau is a curatorial partnership of Yael Metzer and Gilad Reich. Based in Amsterdam and Tel Aviv, they curate exhibitions, film programs, performative events, and edit art publications, which focus on multidisciplinary practices that allow for the imagination of the alternatives in specific socio-political conditions. Past exhibitions and projects include Time Resistance at the Digital Art Lab in Holon, Israel, Am I Not a Citizen? Barbarism, Civic Awakening, and the City, the 13 Istanbul Biennale film program that just passed. Our Work is Never Over at the Matadero Art Center in Madrid in 2012. Sink and Shreds, the collection at the Stickler Museum in Amsterdam in 2011. So without further ado, I'll just hand it to the both of them to talk about George Clooney and everything else.
Especially.
And in the meantime, please help yourself to the pizza and the juice at the back. So it's a lunchtime talk, so let's keep it casual.
Yeah. So thank you very much for coming. And we will first start by thanking Parasite and Ginny and Cosmin and the rest of the team for inviting us, taking care, and hosting us in the last very interesting and insightful 5 weeks. And also thank you, Asia Art Archive, for today, but also in the last weeks been helping us, and by the library being our office in the last weeks. I'm sure we can tell the librarian they will be very happy. We are leaving. They will be happy.
No, we're not.
So as Tini mentioned, we are based between Amsterdam and Tel Aviv. We're working together for 3 years now. We initially cooperated as part of an artists and curators collective called the Living Rooms. And in the last 2 years, we started working together under the name High&Low Bureau. This is our first time in Hong Kong and in this part of Asia. And we didn't come here with a fixed specific topic, but naturally we found ourselves exploring notions and artists that are close to our ongoing research in the fields of labor, collectivity, and everyday practices. During our stay here, we met great and interesting artists and thinker, and also together with the theoretical framework that we came across with, made our time in Hong Kong very interesting, intriguing, and definitely triggered different ideas and hopefully future collaboration and project. Just a second, I need to work on this. Yes. So what we're going to do in the talk today, first we will introduce you briefly to a few of the projects that Chini mentioned, just to give kind of a context where we're coming from. And then in the second part, we will elaborate on one of the projects that we're working on now, titled Decolonized Skies, that will take place in form of an exhibition in Apexart, New York in September 2014. So our curatorial practice is dedicated to the exploration of artistic strategies that reflect on and suggest alternatives to specific social-political conditions. We are especially interested in the role of art in articulating, symbolizing, and imagining new forms of life. Or better, how artists create, re-appropriate, and manipulate ideas and images in order not only to deconstruct power structure and their strategies, but also to propose tactics of being and acting in the world. Usually, our interest lies in the subversion of everyday life and not in the grand gestures. This is our website, when you can see all of our projects. I will go briefly on the different projects. So if you have further questions about the artists and the different works, please feel free to interrupt us during or after the talk. And also in our website, everything can be found, including the catalogs that can be downloaded. So our first example is Our Work Is Never Over, an exhibition that we curated in 2012 in Matadero Art Center in Madrid. And it was part of the Foto España Festival, which was curated by Gerardo Mosquera. 11 international artists were participating, including Chechin Hayes. Thank you, I'm working on it. Our Work Is Never Over featured work by artists who challenge the apparent separation between art, labor, and everyday existence, or embody the blurring between those arenas in their artistic practice. Self-documentation, one of the most immediate manifestations of the personal or life itself, stands at the center of the exhibition and a common thread between the works. The exhibition mainly featured video works and photographs, but it also featured performance work by the artist Joana Bastos, a Portuguese artist. This is her existing work, and she made a new commission for the exhibition itself, where she sold product in the exhibition space, transforming the space into an illegal market and as another source of income. The second example is last May in 2013. We curated an exhibition in the Israeli Center for Digital Art titled Time Resistance. 11 are international artists, including Sanja Ivkovic, canonical work Triangle, as well as work by Roman Ondak, Antonio Vega Macutela, David Sherry, among others. The point of departure of the exhibition was a different form of resistance, whereby artists challenge hegemonic time perception by means of everyday practices. The work as a whole engaged in non-compliance with various time regimes, from national time economies of the 1960s and 70s to the latent time ideology of the neoliberal information age. As a whole, the exhibition seeks to ask how a social, economic, and technological time regime dictate our everyday life, how they create link between time and place, and how they shape our attitude to the environment we live in, the relationship we maintain, and to our physical and mental condition. One of the works in the exhibition, it was a participatory project titled Real-Time Embroidery Documentary, where the artists spent a whole month in the commercial center in the neighborhood and invited local residents to document their everyday life through collective embroidery. And this is a project that they're doing in different cities and areas around the world. And every time they open an office and they invite people to kind of collect stories together with them, but through embroidery. The last example, we were invited by Fulya Erdamci, the chief curator of the last Istanbul Biennial, to curate the film program of the Biennial that was part of the public program. It took place as part of the International Film Festival. The program title was Am I Not a Citizen? Barbarism, Civic Awakening in the City. And it featured 20 video works, documentaries, feature films, and such, including works by Louis Benuel, Henri Sala, Mika Rothenberg, and Stodelat. Working under the conceptual framework of the Biennial, the film program aimed to provoke thoughts on the overreaching theme of the Biennial, the public domain as a public political form. It featured diverse cinematic practices that questioned the limit of civilization today and focused on the destabilizing force of the neoliberal system and the different responses to it, where notion of barbarism, activism, and civic participation are redefined.
Our experience in Istanbul led us to the current project we are developing. We stayed in Istanbul more than a month, since I was the research curator of the Biennale, and it was very exciting and challenging time being there, since it was right in the beginning of the demonstration, and where the demonstrators still didn't lose their hope, and the police violence was at its peak. In one of the protests, we came across a small drone that was not in the use of the police, but rather was activated by activists. Documenting the protest from above, they were able to locate where the police forces are gathering, and strategized their action accordingly. Moreover, they used the drones in order to document police violence, an issue that became crucial during the fight against the police later. And we'll show you a short video that one of the activists are uploading online, just to give you a bit of So as you can see, it's a midday at Taksim Square, the center of Istanbul. You can see the protester on the one side, and then you can see different police team gathering in different places. This is all the police cars, and this is all police officers. Later, this whole scenario will become like a huge battlefield. Okay. Later we found that the drones become very useful tool during the protests, not only in Turkey, but also in Egypt. Like, for example, this image from the Rabba Square in Nasser City in Egypt, which in a way looks quite similar to the Egypt from Turkey. We still have the music from someone put like a really horrible music to this video, so try to avoid it. Anyway, it was around this time when we also heard about the essential satellite project initiated by the one and only George Clooney. Clooney was actually bought a satellite that monitored the situation in North and South Sudan in order to document war crimes against the local communities. In a way, it is the first positive surveillance satellite, if we want to call it like that, although the project, of course, raises many ethical questions. After documenting the war crimes, the images are analyzed by experts, and the information is sent to the media in order to influence public opinion and policymakers outside of Sudan. So, alongside a few artists and projects that we had in mind, we decided to look deeper into the practice of re-appropriation and democratization of the view from above as a civil, subversive, and everyday practice. This is what led us to develop the Decolonized Skies project. Right now, we are still in the research phase of the project. We haven't decided on the final list of participating artists, and we're still exploring a few theoretical perspectives. So in this talk, it's actually an opportunity for us first to share with you the visual journey that we've been experiences in the last few months, and also the theoretical journeys that we're going through in order to develop the theoretical framework for the project. So as our theoretical project, we would like to talk briefly about our understanding of the history of the view from above and its relationship to the notion of modernity. And in general, we're looking at two different histories of the view from above. These histories intersect with each other, and sometimes it's hard to differentiate between the two, but yet we find it very productive from a theoretical point of view to articulate them separately. So the first history, and the more depressing history, is the history of the view from above as a space of state control, as Henri Lefebvre put it. And as we can see in the image, this history dating back to the history of colonial maps, followed by First and Second World War, and the technology of air photography as a technology of surveillance. You can see here this dog. The view from above was constituted during this process. The view from above was constituted as a gaze of the authority. The photos were taken by those who have the technological and financial means to produce them, and hence to analyze them and to archive them. These photos are used to organize, control, and supervise territory, usually territory that is already framed as a hostile one. To understand how deep the view from above is constituted in our imagery as a perspective of power and control, we have to notice that aerial photography usually create images where everyone or everything in the image looks suspicious. Like this photo, for example. Later, of course, the view from above advanced to more sophisticated technologies as the satellites and the spaceship. And what we see here is the first surveillance satellites that were sent to space in '59 by the Americans. But the more dramatic change took place a few years ago when more and more countries start using drones as their primary weapon for surveillance and destruction. So for those of you who are not very familiar with the whole drone discourse, I will just give a very short introduction to the topics. When we talk about drones, we actually talk about unmanned aerial vehicles, known also as UAVs. These drones are controlled from the ground by pilots that look at the screen, or sometimes few screens. The military drones are quite big. Actually, when you see them live, it can be surprising how big they are. And they carry weapons as well as surveillance equipment. These drones usually have, the military one usually have two pilots. One is charging on navigation and the other on the weapon or surveillance equipment. And what is one of the interesting things about drones is, for example, the drones that operate in Afghanistan and Pakistan, which is the most popular area, they are sitting, for example, in Nevada and operating the drone. So they have this shift. The guy can wake up in the morning, they go to the office, sit there and do his job, maybe kill a few people or just like do some surveillance job and then just go back home. So it's a very weird experience, and one of the artworks that we later are going to see are also talking about this new experience that people in the army didn't have before. But of course there's also a very small drones for private use, different size. Some of them can fly by using your iPhone, your smartphone, and they also have different names. Some of them are called helicopters with a camera, but basically they're all like part of the same big family. So right now we are going to focus on the military use. So just a few basic details. The first drone attack known to us, since it's very hard to collect information about drones, was in 2004 in Pakistan. It was initiated by the USA, and 8 people were killed back then. Due to 2011, the CIA activated more than 7,000 drones only in Afghanistan. And right now in the US, there's more drone pilots than combat pilots in the army. 3,500 people were killed up to last year by American drone strikes. And although we don't know exactly the facts, many of them weren't terrorists, or they were like people that happened to be around the attack area or were falsely suspicious as terrorists, although they weren't. And this is also something that we will come back to when we talk about different artworks in relation to this topic. But of course, the US is not the only country who use drones. India and China use it extensively too. And Israel, the place that we come from, is known for this extensive use of drones, including drone strikes in Gaza Strip. And some even say that the Gaza Strip is actually a test zone for drone warfare. And these photos that we see here was taken less than a month ago. So this thing is happening all the time. By the way, in the photo, although it seems like a really harsh photo, only 3 people were injured. No one was killed in this specific drone attack. And one interesting fact that we learned a few days ago is that in the air show that's opened 2 days ago in Singapore, Israel is exhibiting its new model for surveillance drone. This is the CEO of the company producing the drones. And in the interview to the Israeli newspaper, the guy said that the reason they choose Singapore to produce their new drones, to present their new drones, is because Southeast Asia is the new developing market of drones. So they're gonna invest in this market in the next few years, and this is where the money. So they're coming here. Be aware. although it's South Asia, not Southeast Asia. I know all this discussion about where in Kong, how to define. Okay, so to summarize this short history of a view from above as a space of state control, one of the main attributes of the view from above as a disciplinary gaze is the erasing of human from the images, or the framing of human in a way that will justify their elimination. This is, of course, an imaginative or rather ideological elimination. Humans are in the image as they are on the ground, but they are not conceived as such. This process is possible because one has to be educated in order to read aerial photos. The images are usually blurry and were taken in unfamiliar surroundings, so it takes skills, training, and knowledge to be able to read them. Moreover, many times in order to create one image, a few photos have to be added up on top of each other. So it takes practice and imagination to see the links between the photos and to be able to analyze them. Look at it from a different perspective. The view from above is always already framed by the viewer and cannot speak by itself. Like any other image, but with larger intensity, these images are always manipulated. So this is one history. And now I'm gonna talk very briefly about the second history, which is a much more positive and empowering history, and this is the civil history of the view from above, or the history of people who took control over the manipulation of the image. So, very briefly, this history has a long tradition too. It dated back to the mid-19th century, and I think the most famous example is George Lawrence photos of San Francisco earthquake in 1906. So this is George Lawrence itself. Just think how complicated it was to put this huge camera in the sky and make it work. But he managed. He produced these amazing photos, were the first and only documentation of the immense damage that the city experienced back then. But the story of civil use of the view from above started to gain popularity only from 2005, when Google Earth was first available. However, even then, it was still a commercial use that is subject to state regulation. I don't know if you know that, but if you look at Google Earth, in many countries, you will see like a whole areas which is completely blurred, and you cannot see the details, and this is due to the regulation different states on Google Earth and the different agreements between the countries. So the more interesting change is happening in the last few years when activists and artists from all over the world are reappropriating the view from above in order to develop non-commercial civil use of satellites, small drones, balloon, kites, and other related technologies. By doing so, they transform the skies to a much more democratic place, and I give a few short examples. This is a DIY drones that you can build by yourself at home. This is a fun use. There is a new company that make beer deliveries using drones to, let's say you hang out with your friends somewhere and you stuck with a beer, so they just bring it to you. There's some also artists that's using drones in a very disturbing way that we're not going to talk about, which is this one. I don't know if you're familiar with this crazy image. Yeah, it's the cat. It's the artist cat. Yes, I think it's really disturbing. Okay, and there's some more serious use of drones. For example, local farmers use it in order to locate fire in the forest. And where we're heading to with our talk is more this direction, when different activists use DIY aerial photography in order to empower local communities all around the world. We will get to this in a second. So just to summarize these two histories together, our project is focused on the point where these two histories intersect. This tendency runs parallel to the wave of social protest all around the world, and part of our research is to look at the relationship between the two. And it's also important to say that the democratization of the view from above, it's not only the process of people taking photos from above, of course, it's also have to do with the knowledge that these images produce, the discourse that is created around this knowledge and the distribution of this discourse. In addition, this project also questions how this process is changing our imagery and what kind of aesthetics is produced by employing the new technologies.
So by going to the aesthetic section and looking at different artistic strategies that we are looking at and thinking for the exhibition, we would like to start by showing an extract from the work by Omar. Maybe some of you have seen this work, 5,000 Feet in its Best. It's a Hollywood-style video from 2011, where Fast brings together different fictional situations, like, for example, the occupation of the USA by an Asian military. He sets a drone above Las Vegas Strip and using testimonies of real drone pilot, and as often in his work, he's blurring between fiction and non-fiction. As you will see, as you can see from the extract that we will watch in a second, Fast asks how the blank spot that characterize the drones and imagery are related to the creation of narrative and personal experience. There are other cases of other artists, for instance, like Haroun Farouki. Also, Fast is interested in the emotional state of drone pilots and the way in which the vision is blurred into the drone's camera. The film itself is 30 minutes. We will see 9 minutes out of it, and I think it will be kind of the bridge by looking more deeply into the artworks. Or not.
Mom, Dad, Johnny, and Zoe are going on a little trip. Let's say it's the weekend, and the family loves the outdoors. Or maybe they need to get away for a while because of the problems Dad's having with the provisional authority. Either way, on a bright Friday morning, they pack up the station wagon with food and blankets and good stuff for the long drive. And they leave their house, locked, for good. So the family drives down their quiet block on a weekend morning on their way to the country. They take a left and a right, stop at the usual checkpoints, present their documents to the occupying forces. It's the same familiar route Dad takes every day of the week when he drives to work. But now he's not driving to work, so instead of driving into town, he gets on the freeway. No, come. The drive is long. The trip is boring. Pretty soon everyone is passed out in the car except for Dad. Mom has a map in her bag, somewhere in the back, but Dad is a proud, caring husband, and he doesn't want to wake her. In these parts of the country, it's hard to get lost anyway. There's one road, and it snakes along the mountains forever. Inshallah, we'll get there. 1 hour later, the roads aren't so good anymore. Dad isn't sure if they're lost, but the road looks familiar, so he puts faith in his instincts. The car bumps along at a much slower pace when Dad suddenly sees several men up ahead. They're digging or doing some work on the road. There's also a white pickup truck, something very common to the folks who live out here in the middle of nowhere. Dad slows down even more. It's not strange to see farmers out here, although these guys are not in the field, and there's no sign saying there's road work ahead. The men spot the car and stop what they're doing. They step onto the road and watch as the family gets nearer. Dad can see that one of them has a shovel, and the other two have some working tools, or maybe sticks. Are they shepherds? There are no goats anywhere, no sheep, no camels. The earth on the side of the road is like hard clay. Digging into it with one shovel is no walk in the park. Dad stops the car about 50 feet away. He can see the men very clearly now. The one with the shovel is younger, almost a teenager. He wears a traditional headdress. The other two are older. They're dressed in clothes more typical to tribes from further south, and they're armed with Kalashnikovs. Dad looks at the men. The men look at Dad. He knows who they are and what they're doing, but he doesn't care. It's none of his business. He just wants to be allowed to pass and is not looking for trouble. One of the men waves Dad along, but also holds up his weapon. The other man approaches. Both he and the digger look on with suspicion. Dad edges the car forward. Just then, Mom wakes up. She sees the men and is immediately close to panicking. Dad whispers for her to be quiet and continues. The men are almost in line with the car now. They bend forward. Dad passes the men slowly and then steps on the gas. The crisis is over and it's best to get out of here. The men watch as the car pulls away. Dad takes Mom's hand and squeezes it. Just then, a shrieking sound pierces the still air, cleaving through it like the cry of a heavenly messenger. The Hellfire missile hits the ground before anyone can react, nearly vaporizing the three men on impact. The pickup truck takes most of the damage, but the station wagon isn't spared. It pulls up ahead and waits, generously, patiently. Time passes. Time is on my side. Seeing the world from above doesn't just flatten things, it sharpens them. It makes relationships clearer. The family continues their journey. Their bodies will never be buried. Sorry, I gotta take this. I'll be back in a minute.
On that specific mission of the night, I was checking routes for IDs, looking for improvised explosive devices. And I would just be searching through the streets, a lot of side streets. I'll scan those roads, and it was at night here in Vegas, and it was daytime there. But I came to a spot in the middle of the road that was darker than the road itself, which for the infrared camera means that darker images are showing as warmer. And it looked like there was a line going. Now, what they didn't know at the time, which they do know now, which is not classified really, is that when an individual digs up soil and tries to put a metallic object underneath the soil, that metallic object can show at a different temperature than the surrounding soil. Because it's handled and then put down there and it hasn't had a chance to just absorb into that ambient temperature of the surrounding area. You'll see it quite clearly when you're looking at an infrared image. And then when you have a length of wire as well that was spooled up in a different temperature area, you put that on the road and try to shuffle up dirt. Now that dirt is a different temperature, really to be cooler or hotter for shuffling around the cord. Now following the line, it goes to the side of the road. And I noticed some houses that weren't fully constructed. And I'm looking around and I'm seeing a little guy smoking on the roof. And this wannabe terrorist is just sitting there. He's being real slick, not even moving. Just looking around constantly, waiting for, a Humvee or one of the military vehicles to show up to detonate. And there's, 4 or 5 guys, and they're just sticking around. You can tell they're up to no good. There's, ambush. So we call in, and then we're given all the clearances that are necessary, all the approvals and everything else. And then we did something called the Light of God. The Marines like to call it the Light of God. It's our laser targeting marker. We just send out a beam laser. When the troops put on their night vision goggles, they'll just see this light that looks like it's coming from heaven, right on the spot, coming out of nowhere from the sky. It's quite beautiful. They usually have other outside observers that come to the GCS at this point, just to kind of watch and to monitor the situation. And the people who sit in the main building, they have projected images up on the wall of the camera feeds that are coming out, like everything up to the Pentagon can see what we're doing on this feed. And we fired off a Hellfire missile and we got the target. I mean, they didn't quite stand in to me that, hey, I just killed someone. My first time, I was within my first year there. It didn't quite impact. It was later on through a couple more missions that the dreams started.
So that's from Omar first video work. Pretty depressing man, but very interesting, and juxtaposition of narrative from Afghanistan and Pakistan with American life. So one of the strategy he uses here, besides the different narration and the juxtaposition, is the re-appropriation of the view from above, creating new imagery, also by flying this drone above Las Vegas, which is a beautiful shot. And so there's different artists and activists using the same strategy, but in a very, very different ways. And one of the projects that we are more interested in is the grassroots mapping, which is a global organization of activists that provides the know-how for production of participatory local DIY aerial photos. The project we are specifically talking about is took place in a Palestinian neighborhood in East Jerusalem, which of course is under an Israeli control. And in this project, a group of activists work together with the local community in mapping their own surroundings, and by doing so to gain more control over the life and the potential use of their own territory. They did so by attaching a camera to kites and balloon, taking aerial photos, and then using open source computer programs, creating maps and images for those photos and analyze them together. So for example, you can see here, the way they use it, they take different photos of the area from different balloons and kites, and then they use this open source program and put it together and create a very specific image of the place they are interested in. And the grassroots mapping organization, they developed this program, so it's open to use for everyone. What is unique about this project is that it focuses not only on the outcome, which is the aerial photos, but also on the mutual process of learning the skills of creating aerial photography. It provides a multiple point of view of the surrounding, function with zero budget, and produce knowledge which is completely locally based. So this is one example, and another example, also very, very different, is Trevor Pelgan project, the Other Night Sky, which is one project of many projects that he did around this issue. And in this project, he traces and photographs classified American satellites in space. His images aim to articulate the complex relationship between the different elements that produce the space of state control: the weapon industry, the security agencies, the drones, and the surveillance satellites. He is interested in using high-end technology in order to give visibility to hidden technology of power that makes the mechanism of control possible. In a way, Pagan's project, or like, at least how we would like to read it, is trying to do to the airspace what the state control do to us, to organize and control a territory. But in this case, instead of top-down disciplinary gaze, it is the bottom-up decolonized gaze that creates civil and accessible knowledge. Usually this photo is also accompanied by a whole set of information about what we see, how the picture was produced, and the whole mechanism around this image.
Another artistic strategies that is being employed is the appropriation and manipulation of aerial existing images. In their project, Elements of Composition, Dutch artist Big van der Pol created a site-specific public text piece on an empty parking lot in Manhattan. It was part of the exhibition Living as Formed by the Creative Time. By collaborating with Google Maps, the artist created an image which is abstract from the ground, but completely legible from above. As above, so below. The phrase of the text piece points toward the continuous re-evaluation of space in the neighborhood, including vertical development and the issue of air rights, which apply to owning the space above plots of land and building. As the site of the parking lot and the empty sky above will soon be developed and capitalized, the text piece image will be achieved by Google Maps and will become part of the history of the neighborhood. There was two parts of that of the project. This is the first part, and the other one involved guide walks in the neighborhood by local residents, and would share their knowledge about the history and the experience of and living in the neighborhood. Here, Big van der Pol bringing together grassroots participatory local knowledge with top-down corporate technology and single viewpoint in order to discuss question of urban planning, the future of the city, and the ownership of over the sky.
And just a short anecdote, during our stay here, we ran into a local politician from the Gary Funk, from the Neo-Democrat Party, that from a very unartistic point of view is interested in the same questions of use of territory and ground and air rights. And he put on YouTube this video, also using drone as a mean to make his point. So we'll just show you a few seconds of that.
政府強行推出嘅新界東北發展計劃引起社會巨大嘅爭議。除咗係割地賣港、建構雙非富豪城之外咧，就係政府唔願意收翻呢個嘅高爾夫球場。粉嶺高爾夫球場面積170公頃，大到好似一個荃灣咁。而家咧係2000名嘅富豪享用。政府如果係以中密度嘅發展咧，係可以用。
This is another example how knowledge can be produced by using this technology in the variety of purposes. We definitely support his fight against the golf club and the turning of the golf club into buildings and not the agricultural process.
And from another angle, using satellite images and from a very different purpose as well, artists Janen and Ani explored the disappearance of humans from these images that were taken by Americans after the Gulf War. Comprised of the abstract aerial images, while zooming into each one of them, the video Shadow Sites 2 from 2011 explore the process of political abstraction that this image produce, and at the same time underscore the potential of the images to reveal the land's own past. And this issue of abstraction is something that many of the artists are working with. Drawn images, as many other aerial images, present themselves, as we mentioned before, as it's obvious as objective. However, although the technology used today is very advanced, yet the image that is produced is quite abstract. Hence, reading the landscape requires knowledge interpretation. And as we mentioned before, one must have a preconception of what one sees in order to be able to give meaning to it. And this is a bit this double disguise of the view from above. First, it hides itself from the viewer for important information, and the other, it manipulates the viewer to think that he sees an objective image.
I hope that the last point was clear. about this double disguise of the view from above, because it's something that many artists working with, and she is also using here. So many artists decide internally to abstract the image in order to kind of deliver the idea of that the image is already lying to us in a way, and we shouldn't take it as it is. So the last example that we will give, it have to do with what we mentioned before about also the democratization of the knowledge around this view from above. And this is a graphic work by Dutch artist and graphic designer Ruben Pater from 2012. And when he created a publication with kind of a guide for drones, using drones as a symbol of power structure and offering hiding techniques from their gaze. Pater collects the information for the guide from open source platforms, and his work is free to download, and is also translated to Pashto, which is the spoken language in the country that suffer most from drone strikes, Afghanistan. In addition, the guide is printed on reflective material, which is used for interfering the drone sensors, and hence serve as an object that can help one not to be discovered by drones. So this is also a very practical object, and it creates quite big kind of blankets made out of this material.
And what all these projects have in common is and this is a crucial element to our research, is the question of positioning. For instance, unlike George Clooney that aim to mark where are they, all of these projects ask where are we? What is our position within a specific social and political context, and what we can do about that. To conclude, this is in a way where we are at the moment, where we are thinking, of course, how to bring those artistic projects together, but also how to create the exhibition not only as a static place, but also as a more active place, like an active place in terms of bringing workshop and talks to the space. And we're very interested in the empowering force of some of these new artistic practices that also question the role of art and artists in the period of vast change in our point of view in imagery. Among the questions that we ask ourselves throughout the research are: how can we free ourselves from the weaponized authoritarian view that is associated with aerial perspective? Under what condition and by whom these warrior images are produced and used? And how these new viewpoints provoke our political imagination and encourage us to actively decolonize the sky. Thank you. That's it, pizza.
Thank you, there, High&Low Bureau. Do we have any questions? It's a very interesting presentation when you think about public and private space as well. So, before we go to the pizzas.
This kind of continuing what Chini was asking about when, in terms of considering this kind of aerial view, also, and how the public and private spaces, these kind of intersection. I'm just wondering, most of the works that you have shown are kind of image-based and all that. I'm just interested to know how you think of the interference of the body and, say, performance in this line of research.
Yeah, it's definitely something that we take in mind. Also, it's interesting because, not all of them, for instance, the way we see the project of grassroots mapping is very much involving, let's say, the body or the presence of oneself in a specific area. And that's also part of what we will try to do, I think, in the exhibition, and maybe more from the workshop, let's call it like that, and the different, more performative element, by being in the space, by bringing people and by kind of trying to activate the place, not only as kind of the more image-based exhibition, but rather also as a more presently in the actual space itself.
I'm not sure it answers the question, but also, yeah, there is when working, there's a risk working on these materials, which is becomes somehow like, yeah, all these images of drones and maps, and yeah, which is also very not us in a way, not kind of thing that we are doing. Something very rational and also very manly, because something about drones is a very manly issue. And yeah, it's like technology, you know, it's like high-end technology. And so what we are looking at is, yeah, is taking this issue back to the personal, like how people interact with this technology, and yeah, and also from the emotional perspective. So also it was important for us during this presentation also, and this is why we choose to show Omar Fast work and not other works, because it's focused on this aspect rather on very yeah, abstract images of skies and landscape. Someone else? Inti, I'm surprised you don't have a question. I'm sure you have, by the way.
I have what I have.
Yeah.
I'm actually curious in relation to your stay in Hong Kong, if maybe like the bird eye view is not only satellite, but it's also corporate. In this case, like how superpower financial companies actually also look below. I mean, is there something that interested you now that you came to Hong Kong?
Well, it's something that we discover while being here. It's hard not to notice that. Yeah, so in a way, it's very much related to the whole idea of the view from above, and yeah, we look at it here. But as we mentioned, we are more interested in, you know, like how people are reclaiming this point of view. So, for example, we had a very interesting discussion with Nadim at some point about how some of the top of these buildings are used as actually a public space. No one knows about it, no one uses it, but it's defined as a public space, as people are allowed to go there. So yeah, so it can be very interesting to think about like how we can use these two rooftops as how we can reclaim this rooftop. But right now it's not in the scope of our project. Thank you.
I think, I'm not too sure whether you talked to them about the research that you did about their sky rights. Remember we were talking about the ownership of the skyline above the buildings in Hong Kong as well. So there was, I thought it would be like interesting that you were mentioning it as part of your research.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's something also following the Big Van der Paar project that we would like to look more into it, and also like have a very interesting history, because part of the research that we did, we discovered that when the first airplanes were flying about the fields in Europe, the farmers were complaining to the authorities because the airplanes were used to scare the cows and the sheep, and the farmer was like, "What? This is our land, you know. This is our skies. How can you fly over our fields?" So today it's kind of clear that they like, or maybe it's not clear, which own the sky or the air rights. But back then it was a completely open issue. This question of ownership, and yeah, it's very interesting to think about it also in terms of what's happening here. Yeah, who has the right to build tall buildings, and who owns it, and how the public can reclaim these skies too. Yeah, and we will be very happy to hear about, if you know about activists or artists working around these issues here. We'll be happy to learn more.
Yeah, I just wonder if you have a part of your research. Have you ever heard about North Korea spying in South Korea with those drones? I think I have ever heard about it, but I don't exactly know that if you have ever run into that kind of facts during your research.
The North Korea
Spying
Spy.
South Korea or the other
Yeah.
area with drones
well, we haven't heard about it, but it's make a lot of sense. Many countries are spying many countries using drones. I think Israel
Oh, okay,
flying
yeah.
drones all over Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, Sinai, whatever you call it. Yeah, there are drones everywhere.
So it's everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, and also it was just discussed a few weeks ago that apparently in 2011, the U.S. arrested a man in the U.S. on the U.S. soil using drones. So there were surveillance people using drones, and then arrest the person, and then they realized that it can become a huge issue if the public will know about it. So they stopped using the use of drones for inner surveillance for now, but I'm sure it's gonna happen very soon. Yeah, they will find a way. And also a few weeks ago, the air authorities in the U.S. decided to open 6 airports, let's call it, for drones, like official ones in the U.S. in different places as a test to see how it's going to work. So it's going to be a very important part of our life very soon.
I think relation to that, we know and we don't know, that's part of it. And I think also part of the understanding and part of what's happening in the last years is the awareness. So from one hand, it's definitely like the awareness that this technology is definitely part of our life, but part of a military use and part of a state policy use. But at the same time, for instance, Israel never officially mentioned anywhere that it's using drones. It's a well-known fact, but they will never declare it. So it's again kind of this, it's something that's in between space that it's still taking place, and this is also where we find that space interesting for to do something and to bringing up and to also to suggest other angles to the topic.
It's a very interesting subject, and I had a lot of associations while you were talking. And one of the things that I was thinking about is how this idea of like the view from above, which people used to maybe make different types of art or markings in the ground as something to be seen by God, and now it's just become like it's something to be seen through Google and turn viral, and we can make like little scissors in the sand and things like that. Yeah. There's a lot of also like the people that used to like the UFO circles. And that, like, there's a lot of different kind of culture around all those things of this view that used to be dedicated to God and now has turned into something else. And I was just the one association which is maybe less known and I thought it was very interesting is actually heard about it by a mathematician who went to research architecture in villages in Africa, that from above they have a fractal view, like they turn smaller, the way that the whole village is built like that. And you're saying that also like people don't know about it, and don't really see it, and also but by having that knowledge it also is a way of turning more knowledge about African culture into, like people usually associate African culture with dance, with art, with different things, and not really necessarily with mathematics or with the combination of maths and art, and was a way of like bringing those aerial shots and talking about those things was a way to kind of bring more knowledge about that view from above, which is also very interesting that it's also kind of dedicated to gods and usually has a religious stand behind it.
We didn't get into it, but of course the view from above is like the God view, and it's like the sublime. So it goes way back. But what you are suggesting actually, and also can be interesting to think about, is that maybe we are approaching, in the future, near future, we're going to see a whole new wave of land art, because many land art artists use the view from above for the work. But now, when this technology becomes very available, yeah, so it's also interesting to think not only in terms of decolonizing the skies, but also how we can think the ground. Yeah, so it's also related to this African build thing and how we build things. UFOs.
Crop circles.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll just round this up, and if you have any further questions and you feel a bit more bashful about it, you can approach them later among their vegetarian pizzas and some juice. High&Low Bureau will be in Hong Kong until, well, they're going off for a week, but they're coming back next week until the 2nd of March. So if you have any questions, or if you'd like to meet with them, or you have any information that might help them with their research, so you could step forward as well, email us, and we'll put you in touch. Okay? Just a small reminder, don't forget we have another presentation at Spring Workshop tomorrow at 6 p.m. So if you can come around, it'll be good fun too. That's Ming at the back. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.